way we'd frame this one, this is a bit of a hodgepodge in a way, but there are these. We talk about the roadmap that Ramesh was laying out in the beginnings, right? We're starting this registry, but we're looking to a world in which there's effectively an AI economy out there of all these players, right? And there'll be payments, and there'll be transactions, and then there'll be this AI, AI agent society and everything else. So I think it's really important, we've already had a bit of this already, but just to think about the stakeholders in this. And so you guys with Acurast and Filecoin are sort of looking at this sort of from I think the decentralized storage world, that sort of like essentially like providers of a service into this world. What do you need from the registry environment? And Lindsay, I'm putting you on the spot because Yuma is essentially a dev lab, right? Building, you're enabling the building of the BitTensor ecosystem. But coming from DCG and all of that, I'm sure you've got some ideas about payments and money. And I think that's also this sort of like almost like the stakeholders being the payments world. How does that fit within this? So I just think again, we're trying to sort of build out this Web3 quilt. Thoughts that you might have on considerations for those worlds. Why don't we actually go to payments and to start off with, if we can?
Yeah. So I think it's worthwhile to kind of give a quick background on what Yuma is doing. So we're working solely in the BitTensor ecosystem, which, if you're not familiar, it's a very interesting one that kind of brings together AI and blockchain and allows builders to come and incentivizes them to kind of build these certain projects. And so my role at Yuma is actually working with teams and enabling them to build on the network. And so it's really interesting kind of hearing all of the different conversations today in what the problems are. And BitTensor is interesting because you can incentivize really any problem. And so kind of thinking of the need for compute or need for certain data, or trying to figure out what the incentives should look like. There's a lot of the same problems that I'm kind of seeing in BitTensor, where we're talking about with agents today. And I kind of go back to the question of like, what are we really trying to solve? I think that really resonated with me, and trying to find the product market fit. I think there's still some questions to be had there. And in terms of figuring out what the monetary component should look like, I think we're still a ways from that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's right. There's definitely, I've seen with the builders on BitTensor.
How are they paying each other?
Exactly. So it's all blockchain based. Right. And it's the
paying in their silos, they're paying each other with ETH or something, right?
Yeah. So what we're starting to see is subnets, connecting to each other, but it's all based on an ecosystem that uses Tau. Tau is very similar to Bitcoin. It's built on the same fundamentals as that. So it's 21 million cap, kind of same halving schedule, all of that. And so it's been actually super interesting because every subnet now has their own token, and that's a new thing that came in February. And so it's been a very interesting kind of wild ride the last 4 months with that. But we are just starting to see these subnets work together. And when I talk about like product market fit, one of the things that we've started to see in terms of agents on the BitTensor network is using agents to actually bring whatever product or problem that the subnet is solving to the light, because a lot of times it's just kind of this, things are happening under the hood, but you don't necessarily see what's happening. And so they're bringing it really in a very rudimentary way just to Twitter. But I think there's a lot of great things that you could take in terms of learnings that have happened with the incentive mechanism structure and what's been done there in terms of work to bring that to light in solving this problem.
I often think if you asked AI, like, which currency would you want to use, you'd say, what is this thing called the US dollar? And it's got this sort of 12 people who meet, every 6 weeks to make a decision about the interest rates. And it's got this connection to a political system that is all got wars. And no way, right? It would want something on chain and something digital, but we'll have to see how it all evolves. Okay, so from the perspective of decentralized compute and storage, Jonathan, I know you're actually with Filecoin, but you work on you were ANSA research, right? You're part of the Filecoin ecosystem. It struck me that like the question in some respects with regard to this registry I would come up two ways. Maybe you could answer both of them. One is like, does the decentralized storage community world need from an AI inter-AI registry system like the one we're talking about here, this quilt model, but also like what role can decentralized storage play, right? One would think that these networks of registries and systems residing in a decentralized storage environment could be also quite valuable for the sake of its perpetuity.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to answer that, but I may bank shot off of two of the previous comments. I think one from the guy from Stellar and the other from the guy who was asking, what are we doing here? I think like one thing I think about a lot is how much of the web today is based on social trust rather than verifiability. And I think one of the cool parts of this like registry idea is trying to inject different things where you're having some notion of like self-describing inside of it. I think from the perspective of like, how do we want these off-chain systems to talk to on-chain systems? I think the best way is if we have some way of saying there's like some verifiability link, whether or not that's coming from a cryptographic proof through like some consensus mechanism, or being able to use like a Merkle tree and then being able to like say, is this piece of data tied somehow to some root hash so I can verify all the way through? I think in that context, I think decentralized like storage isn't needing stuff so much from AI agents or anything like that. I think it's probably the reverse, where ideally decentralized storage is using the right set of primitives that makes it easier for an AI agent to know that some service has been rendered over time. So if it's trying to store some data or something else, the question that I would ask any decentralized storage system is, what guarantees are you giving so that that agent can verify that that thing is true in like a purely programmatic way without having to rely on some sort of like person or some brand reputation to just assume that some content exists. Maybe specifically on the registry piece, I think something that's maybe worth considering is how are you building the registry in a way where you don't add a different form of intermediation? Like in some sense, if you are saying in order to interact with the world, you now need to talk to some registry to go do some stuff, that is also somewhat limiting because you also want a version of the world which says maybe inside of some sort of like context, two different agents can directly interact with each other, still trade their credentials and things like that. And so there's been a lot of thinking, I think, from like a sister project to Filecoin, the IPFS world, in terms of just like direct peer-to-peer, more directly just using like the same concepts that you might find in DIDs with what we call content addresses. And so maybe that's an area that is worth looking at as well, just more from like how people have been thinking about this with the decentralized web at large. And then I think the class of storage systems and things like that, I think it hopefully can help just from offering the right set of primitives to tie with AI agents. But I would, maybe more focus there.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, I'm tight for time. So, Kristen, just let's close out with Acurast. I think one thing that's exciting to me about Acurast is you sort of bringing this down to a more commodity layer of edge compute, edge storage capacity, literally phones, smartphones being used in arrays. And I think that's, again, a very important question about the economics of this, like that everybody gets to participate. So how do you think about this Web3 quilt idea from that perspective of the edge compute clients that Acurast serves?
I don't know where to start. I'm positively overstimulated. You know, when you have Chrome open and you have like 100 tabs I want to answer to. The first one is like trust. So I've been thinking about trust ever since I've been in touch with computers, and I think you brought it up beautifully that we need verifiability. That's why we have cryptographic systems in place that we can actually develop and use to verify stuff. And I think this is also an answer to Shaw from Eliza. He raised a nice point, like, what are we actually doing? And I think we built the trust infrastructure of the future. And then the second point that John also mentioned is all these data centers that we build right now might be obsolete in like a couple of moments, let's put it this way. He put it beautifully, and then also raised the question of Apple having to sort of put more R&D into it. And basically that's what we do. We leverage like both things. We leverage the trust infrastructure from cryptographic systems, combine it with blockchain trust infrastructure, and then ultimately leverage the hardware that is so superior from mobile phones on the edge. And that's how we can actually fit perfectly into NANDA. When I read all the descriptions and the papers, it felt like it's like a match made in heaven, because like our infrastructure perfectly fits the use case of NANDA. That's more or less what it's about.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. So much more we could have discussed. Thank you to the three of you. Thank you to all of our participants in this fishbowl round that we went through. all of the speakers, you are all invited to be part of the Invite workshop. So those of you who are here, just make sure you remember that. There'll be information about where to go and everything else. And we're also going to make sure